Welcome to Visionary Doc, where ambition meets purpose and self-discovery fuels transformation. Are you chasing success but feeling unfulfilled? Delve into the joys and jolts of high-achieving lives, and together, let's redefine ambition. It's time to strip away the pathological and embrace the potential. Join host Dr. Shez as we explore what it means to be a visionary of your own life.
Welcome to the Visionary Doc podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shez, and I'm super excited to talk to Amanda Carones. Or what do you prefer, Amanda Cardwell?
Oh, I answer to anything. Cardwell Carones.
Well, I am super excited to speak to Amanda Cardwell Carones, who is a dual citizen, and right now you are in Italy. Is that right?
I am.
That's awesome.
Milano.
Okay. So there's a whole story there that I want to unpack. So I'm super excited to have this conversation that I think is going to be far-reaching, and a lot of people are going to be able to relate to it. So thank you for coming on, and thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited.
Me too. Me too. So I, kind of like to do a little bit of research on my guests before they come on. So I did some research on you, and I mean, gosh, like your vision for ophthalmology and entrepreneurship in general, right? Like it's so far reaching, everything you're doing with ophthalpreneurs, and I really want to get into that as well. It's funny, I used to call myself a doctorpreneur in medical school and residency, and nobody got it. They're like, what's a doctorpreneur, And here you are, you have this entire brand around it. So I'm super excited for that. But that's not where your story started, right? You were in a completely different space when you were here in the US. So can you kind of walk us through that initial part of your journey, and how you stumbled upon this, business and ophthalmology amalgam that you're trying to do now?
I can. So it started in Alabama, and as good Alabama girls do, I got married right out of university. And my husband at the time started medical school. I graduated one quarter too late to go with his class. So he was already in medical school when we decided to get married. We decided two doctors in the family were too many. So I decided not to go to medical school, and I got my master's in public health and epidemiology instead. But I realized very quickly I was not going to make the money that I wanted to make, and especially not to support two people working as an epidemiologist. So I began working in pharmaceutical sales with Janssen Pharmaceutica. When we needed to relocate for his residency, we were moving to Boston. J&J was under a total hiring freeze. And this is when I was first approached by Alcon to be a refractive account manager. So my job was to go in and teach practices who had acquired the old LADAR vision excimer laser how to convert patients to LASIK. So I realized pretty quickly I had no idea what I was doing. I think I came home crying every day for about 6 months. I said, they're going to catch me. They're going to find out I don't know how to do this job, and I'm going to be fired. So then, at about 9 months, I realized that I was kind of starting to get the hang of what looked good and what wasn't good. And, I continued to develop that over the course of the years, moved into different positions within Alcon, helped launch some of the first premium lenses with a company in the States. And really, I guess it was the next best thing for me. If I couldn't go to medical school, you know what? I could help doctors be successful doing their jobs. So it became, an incredible passion that I carried on even after I left Alcon and joined some other companies as well. I worked for Tier Lab, worked for BBI, and it was really something I was super passionate about, helping the doctors to grow their businesses.
When you first started doing that, like when you were working with Alcon, you went to different practices. Did you find that there was something lacking within the physician community about, what it takes to acquire those types of customers and those types of clients in your practice, like grow that revenue stream? What did you find there?
Yeah, I mean, of course, most of these practices really wanted a cookie cutter approach where you could come in and make changes with everything in the practice except for what they were doing. But the reality is the changes have to start with them. So it required, a lot of conversations with them and getting them on board with the mentality of what was needed. And then it was a matter of, really bringing all of the departments on board and making them a part of the change. So, having the heads of the different departments, whether it was clinical, front office, billing, marketing, having each of those come together, and we were building out a process together, because if they were a part of it, they owned it. So, of course, the doctors tend to think, okay, everybody except for them needs to change. And if they say, okay, you're going to do this, that people are automatically going to jump at it and do it. But I've actually worked on the clinic side before. When I was in grad school, I worked in both a dermatology practice as well as a cardiology practice. And we had this little agreement amongst us that if the doctor asked for something to change, the first time he asked, we weren't going to do it. The second time they asked, we're not going to do it. The third time they asked, okay, maybe we'll think about it, because we were getting so many requests, and most of them were just kind of last minute thoughts, fleeting thoughts that they didn't really care about, that required us to change what we were doing. So having that insight from what the staff mentality was, compared to what the doctor's mentality was, okay, it enabled me to find a way to communicate with both. And, to your point, most of them had no idea really how to price their procedures, certainly not how to attract the ideal patient, get those patients in, and help them to understand the value of what it was they were offering. So a lot of unmet needs and a lot of gaps in their education, for sure.
Yeah, and why are you so passionate about helping doctors become educated in this space? Like, where does that come from?
Looking from the outside in and visiting so many practices, and of course, every practice still has some things that they can improve upon. There's probably not one single perfect practice out there, but I had the opportunity to see a lot of practices where things worked, and I had opportunities to see things that didn't work. So where I could kind of take the best of the best from each of these practices and build something together. And coming from the outside, I was able to see things that they couldn't see because they're so close to it. So, it was kind of like, how can you not see that if you made these changes, if you implemented these things, how much more effective you could be? So, as I mentioned, I didn't go to medical school. Still to this day, in some ways, regret that I didn't. Although talking to a lot of doctors, maybe I made the right decision, especially all of my friends from university are physicians, in the US, and they're all saying, oh, we wish that we hadn't gone to medical school. But, it's something that really, I have a passion for. And if I can't be the one practicing medicine, what I can do is help those who are do their jobs even better. And I may not be able to help with the medical and clinical side, but I can certainly help with the efficiency and the patient experience side of it.
See, if you were a physician, this is how you would want to practice. Like, this is sort of your mark on medicine in a way, right? And it's almost like I'm hearing kind of like, like you feel bad because there's all of this potential that we have as doctors, right? I mean, if we can tickle eyeballs for a living, like, we can do business. You know what I mean? It's not like hard. It just requires a certain level of thinking and just a certain approach. And I think you bring that huge, right? Huge need to our field, not just ophthalmology. I mean, I think medicine, broadly speaking, right? I think you would have, you would have been an amazing doctor, I think. Because the clinical and surgical knowledge, like that's I mean, you can read a book and learn that, but there's a way to think about, like, we're not just offering a service, like we are providing a much needed service to our fellow human beings, right? I remember, like, I saw one of your posts and it was like, I think you were like walking through a doctor's office, like how a patient would walk through, right? And you were like, doctors, when was the last time you actually literally put yourself in your patient's footsteps and walked through your practice? Like, would you want, your guests or your loved ones to see what you see, right? And so I think you bring that humanistic element to business that you don't really see often, you know?
I try to give, as many examples and analogies as I can. And the reality is, most doctors are, entering their offices through a back door. They're not even walking through the waiting room that their patients walk through. If you're doing your job effectively and efficiently, you're not seeing what happens outside of your exam lanes very often either. So there are a lot of things where the doctors don't even necessarily understand how their practices run. They don't necessarily understand how the patients get to them. They only know what's happening inside that exam lane and inside that OR.
Mm,
So, and I look at, really from the time that I started working in, like, let's say the presbyopia correcting lens business, but also the laser, refractive surgery business, you know, it's either laser vision correction has remained relatively flat. The premium IOL side of the business is growing at a snail's pace. And why should that be the case? Because we know the potential that's out there for patients. The problem is and sometimes we can't get out of, or practices can't get out of their own way in order to be able to reach these patients. So there are so many patients who could benefit from what we're able to offer. Same goes for not just vision correction procedures, but interventional glaucoma. The need for those procedures is going to increase drastically as the population continues to age. Same thing with ocular surface disease. So if we can find a better way of running our practices, find a better way of reaching those patients, just think about how many more people can benefit from what these procedures and therapies offer.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like doing a disservice to your profession to not live up to your potential, you know? Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you brought this conversation into our field. There are other organizations that talk more about, like, the business of medicine and things along those lines. What makes ophthalpreneurs different? Like, what is sort of the differentiating factor in what you are trying to create?
It's the community. It's the community mindset, I think. To be perfectly honest, when we started building up Ophthalpreneurs, we had no idea that it was going to turn into the movement that it's become. In fact, when we first started planning it, this was going to be a half-day course that we were going to run, and that was it.
Mm,
And as we began speaking with various colleagues, it started out this was going to be just talking about soft skills relative to presbyopia correcting lens education. And then as we talked to colleagues, they said, well, you know what, we could really use a focus on finances. We could use a focus on HR, on marketing, social media. So we started adding more and more topics to the point that it became 2.5 days long. And the first meeting that we had in Streza, every single person who came there was taking a risk. They had no idea, there was no history, no legacy to ophthalmopreneurs at all. They were taking a risk. Every single one of them paid their own way. They paid their own registration, and they showed up, with the mindset that they were going to learn something and take something away from it. So, it's almost like so many other organizations, the business aspect has been on the back burner, and the organizations are so big that, the people who own their own practices and are looking to grow really aren't getting the attention that they need. So I kind of laugh and joke that, well, if we aren't going to get the attention we need from their club, we're just going to go create our own cool kids club, and we're going to
I
focus
love it.
on, yeah, and we're going to focus on the stuff that we find that we need, that we would feel is valuable. So when we keep the group small, we want it to remain intimate. We won't grow bigger than, I think this year's meeting or this coming year's meeting, we're going to cap at like 225, 250 max. We don't want it to really don't want it to ever get bigger than that, because if it does, you lose the intimacy. But we
Yeah.
keep everybody together the whole time. So they are, we don't put titles, we don't put company names on badges. You are first name, and you
I
may have your
love
last name
that.
on
I
there in
love
small
that.
letters.
Yeah.
And everybody is there for the betterment of themselves and their practices. So we lose the top titles, we lose the company sponsored events. Everybody is there for the same.
Man, I love that so much. That just whole, like, again, humanistic aspect, right? Like first name, and just, hey, like, I'm not better than you, I'm just here to learn just like you are, right? And maybe we can collaborate instead of compete all the time. How about that? And you mentioned everyone is there for the betterment of themselves and their practices. So I'm super interested in themselves part of it, right? Personal development is like a huge focus of everything that I want to do in my lifetime. And I really think the more I think about business and entrepreneurship, like, it's your practice, your business is a reflection of your values, right? Of who you are. It's almost like it's weirdly spiritual for me, like a lot of faiths, they say that we were created in God's or a higher power's image. Well, my practice was created from my image, right? Like, this is a reflection of who I am. This is my stamp on the world. So how does Ophthalpreneurs sort of help in the personal development space of an individual? Because I think it's directly related. You become better at who you are as a person, that directly shows in your business, right? So how do you merge those two?
Completely agree. So, in the first meeting, we talked a lot about like how to talk to patients or staff, I'm sorry, from an HR perspective. We talked a little bit about personal branding as well. In this next meeting, we're going to go even deeper into that. So, mindfulness, understanding how you take decisions, what your kind of innate habits are, being emotional intelligence, being able to recognize how other people may receive information that you're delivering to them, whether that's staff or patients alike. To your point, personal branding. So establishing know, like, and trust with patients before they ever walk in the door. We got into a little bit of how you can do that from a video perspective at the meeting in Streza. We're going to dive deeper into it in Taormina. But, one of the best compliments you can get. So if you start trying to kind of educate your patients through social media, through your website, before they walk in the door, and maybe through personalized videos that you're sending them once they've scheduled an appointment, one of the best compliments you can ever get is when the patient walks in the door to meet you face to face for the first time. They say, you know what? You are exactly the person I thought you were going to be.
Absolutely.
Because that means, yeah, you've established that relationship with them and you are delivering exactly what you said you were going to.
Gosh, that really hits deep for me because, I have, like, for whatever reason, and I think we all go through this, but I was hesitant to put myself out there on social media, right? Like you were saying, and I agree with you. I think, like, you and I sort of, it's like we kind of know a little bit about each other, and this is the first time we're actually even talking, right? And that's what social media does. It's like this snapshot of who you are. And there's an element of authenticity that I think needs to be there, right? So you can truly be who you are. And a lot of times we want to pretend like we're someone because we think we got to, be a certain way. Um, but people can read that, like patients can read that, right? And if you're just who you are, just authentically you, your people will find you. And whether that's patients or your staff members, friends, family, whoever, right? Your tribe, your people will find you. But it was really hard for me to, like, kind of crack that barrier in my own mind and be okay with just being me on social media, and just everywhere. And so, like, in my own practice, where I work, I have a little bio of me on the website, like we all do, right? And it's got some stuff that I usually wouldn't put, but I put on there, like, I'm interested in stand-up comedy, and I do some stand-up comedy. I've climbed Kilimanjaro and all these things. And I mean, patients like love it, and it makes my day because they come in and they're like, "Oh, you think you're funny? You do comedy?" I'm like, "Let's go. I'll show you." You know, it's like this friendly kind of vibe that is immediately set from the beginning because they know me, right? And so yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. What are your thoughts on this authenticity component of social media? Like, what would you say to people who are, still debating on whether or not they want to put themselves out there like that?
Well, I think that it's going to become more and more important that doctors' practices get comfortable with being on social media, because the way that consumers are absorbing information is changing today faster than it ever has before. And people are, especially the younger generations, are looking for doctors who align with their values. And the only way that you can share that is through authenticity. It's really humanizing yourself. So in the past, when it was our parents or our grandparents, generations, they would go to the doctor, and the man in the white coat or the woman in the white coat, whatever they say is what they're going to do. And it was less important how personable the physician is, less important how what their bedside manner might be, but it was more about their skill sets. Well, I think today, in the same way that when we get on a plane, I not even for half a second question whether or not that pilot has the skills to fly that plane and get me from point A to point B. That is a requirement of their job.
Given.
By
Yeah.
definition, that is what they're expected to do. That's the least they're expected to do. So I think that more and more patients and potential patients think the same way. If you've gone to medical school, you've gone to residency, you've gone through your fellowship, at the very least, you should be able to get me the outcome that I'm hoping for. But I want you to be able to do that in a way that makes me feel good about the decision I've taken for this particular surgeon. So, I think that authenticity, that vulnerability, going back to the meeting in Streza, we had one session that was on mitigating risk and failure, and we had two surgeons who got up on the stage and shared some really bad, scenarios that they've had to navigate through. One was on the financial side, and the other, well, it ended up being financial as well, because the practice was almost destroyed due to a flood. But they had to stand up there and say, these are some of the mistakes that I made, and I want others to learn from it so that they can mitigate these risks in the future. That requires vulnerability and being able to say, I made this mistake, but how much more approachable and authentic do the people in the audience feel that these people are now? So I think it's incredibly important that people are moving in that direction. You were talking about intimidation in filming these videos. Let me tell you, the first many that I filmed, I bet I filmed each one of them at least 50 times, because I would stumble on my words. I would say, oh, I didn't mean to say that, or I meant to make this point. So I would start over. And then at some point I realized I'm trying to drive change and get people to step out of their comfort zone and do something differently. I'm not being authentic if I'm only showing the ones that pass muster with my own criticism. So I should be showing the mistakes that I make on these videos, because if they see that I have the courage to put one up that's not perfect, they'll have the courage to do so as well. Because if they're waiting on perfection, they'll never get started.
That's wisdom right there. Yes. Perfection is the enemy of just good enough. Sometimes things are just like good enough to push post on. You know what I mean? I completely relate. I can't tell you how many edits I find myself doing. I have like a virtual assistant who helps me with my edits. And sometimes he'll get frustrated with me because I will like have him, go back to the drawing board on a graphic like 6 times. And he's like, Dr. Shez, this is good. This is good enough. I'm like, okay, you're right. Sometimes you just gotta, have some compassion for yourself, right? Like it's okay to make a mistake. We judge ourselves way before other people judge, sometimes. Wow, man. We have gone all over the place. I I want to kind of dial in a little bit more on this aspect of like adversity and resilience, right? I really believe that there are gifts in our struggles. Took me a long time to start to think this way because I would stay in that victim mentality, for just a long time. And at some point you just got to be like, okay, that happened, but now what do I do with it? What are the gifts that I got from that experience, right? Do you have any experiences like that you would mind sharing and what you learned?
I do, actually several different things. And first of all, as I have shared with you in the past, the stories that you tell about how your past has shaped who you are today, you are, to me, a very strong example of resilience in everything that you and your family have been able to accomplish. And my story is not nearly you know as difficult as what yours has been. I grew up in small town Alabama where almost no one leaves, and I started college 3 days after I graduated high school because I wanted to move away. Not because I didn't appreciate and value where I was from, but I wanted to see what my options were in life.
Yeah.
And, even today, Francesco, my husband, will say, when we go back home to Alabama and my younger cousins are looking at me, especially my younger, like, second cousins, he said they look at you with like you're, I can't decide if they are envious or they look at you like you're an alien because you're so different from what they're accustomed to. And interestingly, several of them have moved away. They've gone on to become nurse practitioners and attorneys and things that just, when I was growing up, that was almost unheard of.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I left Alcon to go to another company to Tier Lab, and I was running all of their European, Middle East, Africa, India business. And for the first time ever, they were profitable in this region, but unfortunately, they were still having financial troubles, and I got laid off from that position.
Mhm.
And the manager that I was reporting to at the time had given me the heads up maybe 6 months before. Financially, the company's not doing well. We may eventually have to go through layoffs and your position may be affected, which, the agreement was if that was going to happen, I would have a heads up and would be able to plan for it. And I did. And timing couldn't have been better because um, we were building my husband's new practice, which meant I now had time to dedicate exclusively to helping him do that with the intention that I would always go back to industry. So practice opened, unfortunately, the last week of January of 2020, which is the worst possible timing ever, with COVID coming. So we struggled through that and, came out on the other side and, have done extremely well in terms of driving volume and, really creating a name for the practice inside of Milan and surrounding areas. I went back to industry again, got laid off again for financial issues. The company wasn't performing as well as it could and was looking to reduce overhead costs. But that was a different scenario. I didn't have the heads up and actually found out before I was supposed to find out. So you were talking about the victim mentality. I had to get over that, that feeling like a victim, and actually dug down deep to find strength and motivation to even get Ophthalpreneurs up and running.
Yeah.
So I tried to take all of that, frustration and sadness and anger or whatever I felt as a victim and turn that into something positive. And now I consider that to be part of my story. So I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason.
Mhm.
Everything happens the way it's supposed to. You mentioned earlier there being a little bit of spiritualism and saying, your practice was created as an image of you. And, a very close friend and mentor of mine shared with me, a prayer that is one of the most simplistic prayers. It's called the Prayer of Jabez. And it says, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically it says, please bless me and enlarge my territory keep your hand upon me and keep me safe from evil. So you're not asking for anything specific in general. You're just asking for blessings in general. And I swear, having this mentality changes the way you think about things, where you are seeing the small little blessings every day throughout the day. And that creates a more optimistic mindset. And
I
just little things that can make a difference.
couldn't agree more. There's this, thanks for sharing that, by the way, first of all. There's this element of like, control what you can control, and then like let the rest fall in the hands of a power that's far greater than you are, right? And that could be God, that could be, the LASIK machine, that could be whatever is the higher power than you, right? But there's got to
Yep.
be something that's beyond you. And I think that was, I'm only saying this like, I'm not like a preacher or, soapbox type of guy, but like I was that guy that would try to control everything, right?
That's me.
Every element of my life was in my head, perfectly planned. It was controlled chaos until I realized that what got me here is not going to get me there. To level up, you got to let go, right? And it's such a humbling thing to kind of put yourself in that mindset. And it's even more humbling then to see things line up when you let go. Like I swear to you, like the prayer you just mentioned, I have something very similar that I kind of lean on. And it just comes down to that. Like you can't control everything. There's a concept in my faith, like tie your camel, like back then they had camels or whatnot, right? So tie your camel, so that it doesn't get robbed, it doesn't run away, and then, you know, leave it up to a higher power. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's deep. I love it. We went from ophthalmologists, business, to LASIK, to God, all of
Prayers and whatever it is that's out there, to spread optimism and have us focus on the things we can control and the things we can't. Exactly.
that's the
Who
chaos
knew
of
what they were getting into when they joined this podcast?
I hope so. I mean, I'm still, trying to kind of explain who I am, but I always feel like whenever I have these conversations, it's like all the chaos in my head is just like like in the conversation because it goes everywhere. So
That's what keeps it interesting.
yeah, right. Well, that's what I tell myself. So thank you. What else? What else you want to share? What else you want to talk about? Do you have any questions for me?
Oh gosh. So you're coming to Ophthalpreneurs, right? I
Absolutely.
think you would be a great person to talk about resilience and to share your story and positive mentality. I, as I shared with you, I absolutely love, how open you are with, with where you are today, how you got to where you are today. I know that you just recently came back from one of the political conventions, and which is, did you ever think 20 years ago that that's where you would be?
No, absolutely not. And now we're getting into politics.
If we've crossed all the other spectrums, we don't have to get into the politics of it. But
No,
what an
no.
incredible accomplishment!
Look, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely surreal to be there. And I don't know. I asked myself like, why do I want to get involved, right? Because like those are the things that matter, right? I mean, the life that you and I live on a day-to-day basis, our lives are affected by people making those decisions. So at the very least, I just want to know how those decisions are being made and by who, right? And the only way that I know of how to learn that is to get involved, and
Yep.
this is not it's not about Democrat or Republican. Believe me, like I was torn, I'm like, where do I go? Because there are some great, you know, values and concepts on both sides that I can relate to. And also, the world is very complex, in case no one's noticed. You can boil things down into this or that, right? So this was, yeah, I mean, going to the DNC was just my way to be in curiosity mode and just learn. And to be honest, I came back even more confused than when I went. Because it's such a silo, right? Like you go there and it's all like this echo chamber. Everyone kind of is thinking the same thing, and it's like, no, the other side's bad. And you go to the
Yep,
RNC, and the same thing
same
over
thing.
there. The other side's bad. Okay, well, if everybody's bad, then like, how do we move forward? So I don't know. I'm still trying to figure those things out in my head. Honestly, I think it comes down to this, right? Like
Yep.
having dialogue, right? Where we give each other the space to be vulnerable. Hey, look,
Hmm.
I believe in some things. I don't know if I'm right, but will you at least hear me out? Like, here's what I'm trying to say, right? And so I don't know. I think if we could just give each other the space to be vulnerable, the world would be a better place. And that happens with these types of dialogues, you know?
Completely agree. I think we'll try to bring that back over to what we do on a daily basis
Yeah,
in
it's all
terms of
related.
shifting a
It's
little
all
bit.
related. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I completely agree. I think if we could all get on the same page and agree to, sometimes it's the phrases that we're using, it's the terminology, the way that we call certain procedures and techniques. It's how we name things. If we could all just get on the page and talk first and align, how much better could we be doing in the market? And you're right. I in a interesting situation where I've been in both the U.S. and I've been here in Italy. I've actually spent more of my adult life in Italy at this point than I did in the U.S. and or at least in my career, maybe not my adult life. And I can see things that I like better about the US, and there are other things that I like better about Italy. There are some things I like better about the US healthcare system, and there are other things that I prefer about Italy. And I can tell you neither of them are, have it 100% correct for sure. I mean, they both have their own challenges. And, over here in Italy, talking about the divide, so there is no their politics are not black and white, as you mentioned, and neither in Italy, where it's pure private or pure public with the healthcare system. There's not a lot in between, and people working on either side get frustrated with the other one, and there's a lot of infighting. So, to your point, being able to have dialogue and try to see things, open your mind to see things from the other's perspective, we would be so much better off than we are today in some aspects.
I couldn't agree more. I think, having that as an element of this next Ophthalpreneurs meeting might be a good idea, right? Because this applies to HR and staff as well. I mean, how many times do we, as owners and entrepreneurs, I mean, finding the right people is really hard, right? It's all, I mean, where politics, business, whatever, relationships, it's the people. It's a people's game.
Yep.
Life is a people's game, right? So how do you find the right people? How do you empower the right people? I think you
Mhm.
listen to them. You listen to them and don't judge, stay in curiosity mode and help them grow so that they can help you grow. It's a service mentality, right? It's a completely different, like, I'm not hiring you so you can help me make more money. I'm hiring you so that you grow to be the best version of yourself. And when you do that in the right role, it will automatically help me and everybody else that's around you, right? Like
Yep.
that's the perspective shift. I think you don't see that enough in the world of business and HR, I feel like.
Completely agree. And I think that everybody they just want to be heard. So that's that's probably one of the things that gets people in trouble more often than not, doctors included, or staff included, is when they're so quick to jump to an answer versus letting either the staff member or letting the patient be heard, because that staff member is going to tell you what their problem is or what they're hoping for. Patient will too. If we just started there, all the rest of the job would be so much easier. It's not to say that you have to give in to what they're asking for. If the patient's asking for trifocal IOL and they're not a candidate for it, obviously they're not, a dog barking in the background, they're not going to
Yeah.
sorry, we got a new puppy yesterday.
It's all
uh
good. We can't hear him at all. It's all good.
Okay, good. So if they're not going to get what they want, but are given the opportunity to explain why they can't have what it is that they want, that is not in their best interest. The same way, if you're working with staff, if you're working with a colleague, who you give them the opportunity to explain their side and understand where they're coming from, then it helps you better able to address their needs, even if you're not able to give them exactly what it is that they're asking for.
Absolutely. I'll say one thing and then I'll let you go. I know you probably got to go. As doctors, we're expected to always have an answer, right? And so we're always like kind of like you said, in answer mode. You come to me with a question or a problem, and I'm like right there, and I'm right. I have to be right because, in my mind, patients' lives are at stake if I'm not right. And that's the good part of medical training, right? It's good to be right more times than not as a doctor, but you're not always right. You're not always right, right? And I think that's where you bring a lot of value because, you have a different level of training and mindset, right? You didn't come down that track of like, you got to be right or the patient's going to die, you know? And so just like being aware that we have that bias as doctors and putting our ego down and knowing that, okay, this is an instance in which I may not be right. And I owe it to the other person, whether it's my patient or my staff, to just listen, right?
Yep.
Just listen. So
one last
yeah,
comment to
please.
that. Do you know that there are actually studies, there is data to show that a surgeon or a doctor's ability to communicate declines throughout his training and career. And to your point, part of it, that's part of the reason why, maybe they're less inclined to listen. Maybe it's because they've had to deliver bad news before, so they don't want to get too close to the patient. Maybe it's the redundancy. They do, literally hundreds of cataracts in a month. So saying the same thing over and over for consenting, a patient or explaining the procedure becomes redundant. But at the same time, it's the first time that the patient on that receiving end, or
Absolutely.
maybe even for the staff members, the first time they've ever heard that. So they deserve the same amount of patience as you would expect if you were going in for a procedure that you knew nothing about. So I think it's just sometimes remembering that you're human and you want the patient to realize that you're human, which is the point of everything that we're advocating for, humanizing yourself in regards to personal branding. But you remember that the patient's human too, and that explain it to them the way you would explain it to your mom.
Man, I love that. Okay, one last thing. One last thing. So,
Oh.
one last thing, and then I'll let you go. I promise. But to your point, though, I mean, I have caught myself doing this over and over again. I'm a high volume surgeon. I did like 60 cases last week, and so even in the surgery room, right? You're about to do this next cataract. You got to treat that like it's your first one of the day. That level
Mhm.
of focus and attention, right? Same thing, whether you're seeing 50 patients in clinic or 10 patients in clinic, same level of focus and attention. And it's really hard. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I do that perfectly every time, right? But again, the awareness to catch yourself, like, okay, you know what? I'm moving too fast, and this is not just another cataract. This is somebody's eyeball. I need to slow down, right? I need to slow
Yep.
down, listen. I need to think.
Yeah. And when you do that, you start to pick up on some of the cues that that they're giving you. You start to realize, are they nervous? Is there something you can do to alleviate that? Is there is there a place to bring in the staff? And if it's something that you're not capable of doing because you're in the zone, having the self-awareness to say, I realize that this is not my strength. I'm going to have somebody in the room who can pick that up and take the ball and run with it if the patient needs a little extra hand holding.
Yes, absolutely. Man, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I kind of want to end on I don't know, a kind of a visionary note, if you will. What's the long-term vision for Amanda Cardwell Carones and Ophthalpreneurs? Where do you see this movement, as you called it, going? Take us into the future.
So, you know what? As I shared, this was never, this was not a situation where we had a business plan and now let's roll out the
Yeah.
business. This
Yeah.
was something that started very small that has turned into something bigger. At the moment, I haven't paid myself anything from Ophthalpreneurs. So to be perfectly honest and transparent, I'm hoping to be able to get to the point that I'm actually able to pay myself and to invest more and more in making this grow. I believe in 2025, we will see at least 3 Ophthalpreneurs meetings. There'll be one in Taormina, which I'll probably always consider to be the main meeting, but we'll see if that changes in the future. There will probably be another one in Argentina, and I don't want to give away where the third one will be, but there's a third one that's already in planning for 2025 as well. And then I believe we're projecting in 2026 to have at least 2 additional from that. So that would be a total of 5. I'm looking to establish really an ongoing, dynamic community where we have, communications and chats going on consistently throughout the day. Those exist for clinical aspects. They
Mm,
don't exist for business aspects. And
mm,
sometimes you need that business input just as quickly as you do the clinical input. So, I want to create a scenario where, people literally can call on each other from all over the world
mm.
with, they propose a question and they get those answers. I mean, this is where I want to be able to see it to go. So we are a global community, but a close-knit global community, all there to help support one another.
Yeah, I love that. On WhatsApp, you can create little communities and
Mhm.
channels. Have you started that for entrepreneurs?
It's coming.
All
So we're
right.
about to open up registration
Okay.
so what we're going to do, we're about to open up registration for the Taormina meeting. And as registrants come in for that, they're going to be enrolled into a WhatsApp community. And then we'll have, so specific for the ones coming to the meeting, that way, if we have any people are gathering, during the breaks, they're going to gather for, drinks or a meeting to discuss such and such. They can let everybody know. Anyone who wants to join can join. And then we'll have a bigger community as well, where if as long as they opt into it, they'll be sent the link to opt in. We'll have all of the people who have joined the community on LinkedIn, which we're at about 2,200 now.
That's amazing. What are the dates out for 2025 Ophthalpreneurs, the first one?
They are. It's 10 through 13 April of 2025 in Taormina, Sicily. So the closest airport is Catania, and it's going to be wonderful. We have reserved the entire property just for Ophthalpreneurs. So the only people who will be on site are hotel staff as well as the people attending the meeting. So, we're really going to have tons of opportunity to network, to, build that community, build that tribe
Mhm.
mentality, and further strengthen what we're trying to build.
That's amazing. Well, it is definitely on my calendar. I cannot wait. I'm super excited. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. So I'm super excited to be there, in the capacity of even if it's just audience, I'm gonna be cheering you on from the sidelines. So I love it.
It's not about me, it's about you guys. So I try to stay on the stage as little as I have to. So but yeah, I definitely want you there. I think that, I'd love to have you share a little bit about, where what you do and your story, and I think it'll be incredibly inspirational.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. This was awesome. I really enjoyed it. We went in all the different directions. This is how I should start my mornings, I feel like, with these vulnerable, peppy conversations and just kind of get my day going. So, thank you so much. This was awesome.
So much fun. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Connect with Dr. Shez at visionarydoc.com.